Να έρθει η πρώτη ομιλήτρια, γιατί ο πρώτος ομιλητής, ο κύριος Μπρένες, δεν είναι εδώ για λόγους υγείας και αυτό είναι που μας κάνει και... Αυτό είναι που μας κάνει και έχουμε συγχωνεύσει τις δύο συνεδρίες, γίνονται και οι δύο εδώ. Καταρχήν να σας παρουσιάσω τους δύο συντονιστές, την κυρία Γιώτη και τον κύριο Κισούδη, οι οποίοι είναι πολύ πιο τεχνικοί από μένα για να μπορέσουν να συντονίσουν. Θα ήθελα, περιμένοντας και την κυρία Wang, η οποία θα είναι και η πρώτη ομιλήτρια, να σας πω κάτι. Είναι κάτι το οποίο είναι τελείως εκτός προγράμματος, αλλά αισθάνομαι ότι πρέπει να το πω και μια και είμαι μπροστά σε κόσμο ο οποίος ξέρει από επιτραπέζια ελιά. Θα ήθελα να σας μιλήσω για έναν άνθρωπο ο οποίος τα τελευταία τουλάχιστον 35 χρόνια που ξέρω εγώ, είναι ο άνθρωπος ο οποίος όταν βρισκόμουν σε άλλες θέσεις στις Βρυξέλλες έμαθε στην Ευρώπη τι σημαίνει επιτραπέζια ελιά. Στην κοινή αγροτική πολιτική η επιτραπέζια ελιά δεν υπήρχε σαν προϊόν, πολύ απλά γιατί καμία χώρα πριν την ένταξη της Ελλάδας δεν είχε επιτραπέζιες ελιές, στην ουσία η Ιταλία. Έτσι λοιπόν, όταν μπήκε η Ελλάδα στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, τότε ΕΟΚ, ανακάλυψε η Ευρώπη δύο πράγματα, ότι πρώτον υπάρχει ένα αγροτικό προϊόν που λέγεται βαμβάκι και δεύτερον υπάρχει άλλο ένα προϊόν το οποίο λέγεται ελιά, επιτραπέζια ελιά. Ο άνθρωπος λοιπόν ο οποίος μας τα έμαθε όλα αυτά σε όλους εμάς τους ευρωκράτες εκεί, είναι σήμερα μαζί μας. Είναι ο κύριος Γιώργος Ντούτσιας, τον οποίο θα πρέπει όλοι να ξέρετε ότι η προσφορά του για τον τομέα της επιτραπέζιας ελιάς είναι κάτι παραπάνω από πάρα πολύ μεγάλη. Θα ήθελα λοιπόν όλοι μαζί να χειροκροτήσουμε τον Γιώργο τον Ντούτσια για όλη την προσφορά του. Πραγματικά το αισθάνομαι σαν χρέος να το αναφέρω. Λοιπόν, και μπορούμε να περάσουμε τώρα στην τρίτη και τέταρτη συνεδρία, οι οποίες είναι συγχωνευμένες. Θα ξεκινήσουμε με την επεξεργασία της επιτραπέζιας ελιάς και επειδή, όπως είπα, ο κύριος Μπρένες για λόγους υγείας του Ινστιτούτου Ντελαγκράσα δεν μπόρεσε να είναι μαζί μας, θα παρακαλέσω την κυρία Wang να μας μιλήσει για την ανάλυση των λιπαρών οξέων, των φαινολών και των υπολειμμάτων μεταποίησης της ώριμης επιτραπέζιας ελιάς τύπου Καλιφόρνιας. Dr. Wang, the floor is yours. Are you going to speak from here? Okay, you have a coffee here.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you, the organizers, for the invitation. 3 years ago, my colleague Dan Flynn told me about the sister olive center that started, and it's great to see how it has developed, and then it's a really an honor experience to come here and share some of the most recent research the Olive Center is doing on table olives. And as my title suggested, that what I'm about to present is data on California-style ripe olives, but it is my hope that we'll expand this kind of research to other type of olives through different processings. So I will get started basically giving a little background on the objective of this project. The table oliving industry in California is struggling a little bit while the olive oil industry is thriving. Part of the reason is that the consumers recognize the health benefits of olive oil, but there has not been very much research on the health benefits of table olives. So that's one thing we're looking at, the phenolics profile, so antioxidants of table olives. Even though the black ripe table olive style processing is quite harsh, but there's still some good stuff left in there. We also look at a fatty acid profile, but with the good, it comes the bad. We are also looking at some processing residues that's used during processing. One is to see how much of that is left over in the product. This is something that's never been looked at before. So that's a part of the goal, is to look at the potential health benefits and risks. And we're also going to determine the effect of different processing, simple origin cultivars on their chemical composition. So we collected samples from processors directly. As Dr. Louise Ferguson said earlier, in California, we basically have 2 processors. So it's not too hard to work with. I just make 2 phone calls and I got all the samples that I need. And the grocery stores. So we went to a bunch of different grocery stores and collected the samples. And these are the chemical compounds that were analyzed. So I'm a chemist by training, so I understand not everyone in the audience is a chemist, but I believe you don't need too much chemistry to understand what I'm going to present in this presentation. So you can feel comfortable with that. But if you don't understand it, that means I'm not doing a good job. So feel free to ask me during the Q&A. So these are the chemical compounds that we analyzed. So phenolics, antioxidants, they're incredibly important for health benefits of table olives and olive oil products. Tocopherol is also an antioxidant, so that's another compound that's related to health benefits. Fatty acids, same thing. So olives are high in oleic acid, which is a monounsaturated fat that is healthy. Sodium benzoate ferrous gluconates are 2 processing aids that's used doing black ripe style processing. Acrylamide and styrene, there are 2 compounds that you don't want in your food. Acrylamide is well known for as a product that's generated through Maillard browning. So Maillard browning is a chemical reaction that you observe when you bake bread. You see how it gets brown on the top? That's through a chemical reaction called Maillard browning. It creates this delicious caramelized flavor that we love, but at a high dosage, it's known as a neurotoxin. In fact, in California, it became a regulation where there's a high concentration of acrylamide in roasted coffee beans, and they're required to put some kind of warning on the coffee. And then it's the same reaction in coffee that is generated during roasting at a high temperature of the coffee beans. And styrene is another toxin that we have included in this study, and I'll show you our results. So the way we analyze this is we get canned olives. We have a lot of things we need to analyze, and then they all require different chemical methods. So there's a lot of different extractions. We use mostly gas chromatography and liquid chromatography analysis to measure phenolics, ferrous gluconate, benzoic acid, acrylamide. These are just their chemical compounds. And then we extract the oil out of the table olives, and then we measure tocopherols and then fatty acid profile. When I say we, I mean my students. So we'll be clear about that. So the processor 1 and processor 2, they're the 2 processors from California, and others are imported samples. So these is the summary of sample breakdown. So as you can see, I don't have a lot of samples. And I should say this is the first study of its kind in California or in the US. So we started small because we wanted to see what kind of results we get in this kind of preliminary study. And then we'll do a larger study in the future. So as you can see, domestic samples, we have black ripe, but with no ferrous gluconate added during processing, and green ripe. And then in the imported samples, we also have black and green. It's difficult to get green ripe style because those are just less common in the marketplace, and that's why it's a smaller sample size in our study as well. And I'm going to jump into the results right away. Here is the breakdown of the phenolics profile. So The brownish bar is the black ripe. The green one is the domestic green. And then the light green is imported black. And then the gray is imported green ripe. So you can see pretty clearly that green ripe, which is not being oxidized, has more phenolics. So hydroxyterosol, which is one of the most important antioxidant that's in table olives, you can see that you get high concentration of that in green ripe, both domestic and imported. And terosol, you get a lot in the green ripe samples, and you can kind of see the trend continues. I should say that this data, if you just look at it, it suggests that the imported green ripe samples have more phenolics, right? However, we only have 2 samples. So this could be an issue of statistical, the size of the sample, which we will know if we expand the size of the study in the future. But as you can see, there are still phenolics left even after the light treatment. So this is something that the California industry was not aware of, that they could actually educate their consumer about the health benefits of their products, like the olive oil industry has been doing very successfully. And I can break this down by the cultivars. So in California, most of the table olives are Manzanillo cultivar, but we also had some samples, Baroni, Godot, Mission, and Saviano. And from this chart, you can see the Baroni samples, the 2 samples that we had the highest concentration of hydroxyterosol. This is similar with if you look at the phenolic profile of olive oil, right? It varies quite a bit depending on the cultivars. So earlier presenters have shown this kind of plots. So I'm assuming that you're comfortable looking at these, but I will still explain this a little bit. So this is called principal component analysis. The usefulness of this kind of plots is basically you give the computer program all this data, and then it's able to find the similarities between your data and group them together. So what we can see here is if you look at, say, this circle here, number 3 is imported green Manzanillo. All the samples that we have, if you look at their phenolic data, they're all grouped together. And the same thing for Baroni, they all grouped together. Here is a little bit more complicated. There's some overlapping between the black Manzanillo, green Manzanillo, and Godot, and then Saviano, they're all kind of here. And then the domestic green Manzanillo is over here. So this is a good separation, but this separation can be improved. Earlier I said we also did fatty acid profile analysis. Let me show you this equivalent of plot, basically this plot, but for fatty acid profile. Now this is a good PCA, principal component analysis plot. You see how clear the different variety are separating? So you can see over here, let's look at these first. Number 5. So Baroni is all separated together by their fatty acid profile. Mission is separated here by their fatty acid profile. 1 and 2, so domestic black and green Manzanillo are all together. So it doesn't really matter if they're black ripe or green ripe. They're together because they have similar fatty acid profile. Okay. And what's interesting, if you have sharp eyes, you notice the imported green Manzanillo is not together with domestic black and green Manzanillo, where you would expect them to be because it's a cultivar issue, right? Cultivar, they should have similar fatty acid profile. This suggests that these may not be actually green Manzanillo cultivar. Okay. And over here, you see Godot and Saviano are clustered together. And this is consistent with some other researchers have shown that Godot and Saviano are closely related cultivars. So moving on, these are the two processing residues that we look at: benzoic acid and ferrous gluconate. Benzoic acid, the levels are much lower than the FDA regulations in the United States, so there's no worries there. Ferrous gluconate, though, one sample was higher than the trace standard set by the International Olive Council, and two samples were close. One was 147, that was a domestic sample, and one was 141, that was an imported sample. Again, this is not something the industry was aware of. Okay, now is the what you don't want to have in your olives. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this because this is an important issue that we're facing in California. And you also highlight the need of having different types of processing moving forward, or modifying the current existing processing. So this is the breakdown of the samples. So what we found is in the domestic black ripe, we have an average about 330. Domestic green is much lower, it's at 92. And imported black is higher than the domestic black, it's at 384. The imported green ones were really high. Okay, and again, to remind you, these are two samples. So this may not be true when we expand the sample size. There's one that's off the chart right here, 2,300 ppb of acrylamide. This sample was not in a can. So all of the samples that we have analyzed here, they were packaged in a can. This sample was in one of those plastic cups. I don't know if you have that here, but it was in those to-go cups that basically, like little kids, they eat it like applesauce, that kind of cups that's in there. So it has, obviously, it was affected by the plastic cup kind of sterilization and packaging that caused this huge amount of acrylamide in the sample. So where does acrylamide come from? So earlier I talked about acrylamide is a product of Maillard browning. So that chemical reaction happens when a reducing sugar and an amino acid, they get together. It's not present in fresh olives. So if you go to a tree and then you pick an olive off the tree and then you analyze it, there's no acrylamide in there. It's generated through processing. But what we know is that the mechanism of the generation of acrylamide in olives is not the usual pathway of how acrylamide is made, such from Maillard browning, which means that we actually don't understand this reaction very well in olives. We know quite a bit when it happens in starch. So if it's like in French fries, in potato chips, or in bread, we know it follows this mechanism. But it's different in acrylamide or in olives, and we have a lot of evidence to support why it's different. So a couple examples is that there's no correlation of reducing sugar and amino acid with acrylamide content in olives. Another thing is calcium inhibits acrylamide formation in starch products, but it does the opposite in olives. So those are pretty strong evidence that's why we believe it follows a different path. So let's walk through, or think about this together. Then how does this happen? Why do we have acrylamide in olives? So let's look at each step of the processing. Okay, so fresh olives are stored in the brine before they're processed. Okay, so what we know is that longer storage time lead to less acrylamide. So then we can pose the question and say, okay, precursors degrade or diffuse from the olives over time. Should we just put it in the brine longer before we actually process it? Would that be a way to reduce acrylamide? Okay. And then we know that olives stored in calcium chloride had a higher acrylamide than those stored without. So that suggests maybe calcium helps to keep the fruit firm, which prevents diffusion of precursors from the fruit. I have some data on this that I will show you. I should say all of this is relatively new, as we really don't know much about this. So, but I'll show you basically everything that we know as of yesterday. Okay? And olives stored in the brine had a higher acrylamide than those stored in acetic acid. So for each one, we can come up with some kind of hypothesis why this is. But in order to know this for certain, we need to do more experiments, right? And then we know the time of light treatment also affects the concentration of acrylamide, and number of washes that you do after the light treatment also affect acrylamide. And olives processed with oxidation has less acrylamide. So the green olives that we saw had less concentration of acrylamide than the black olives. So if you're looking at this, you would say, okay, what doesn't affect acrylamide concentration in black ripe olives? There's one thing I'll show you, which is this one. Ferrous gluconate has no effect on acrylamide. We have data to show this, and I can tell you that's the only thing we have eliminated so far that has no effect on acrylamide. The sterilization is the one key step that severely impact the concentration of acrylamide. We published a paper on this last year. Basically, if you reduce the sterilization temperature, you can almost remove or reduce acrylamide formation completely. However, this is not a practical solution for the industry. So this is why we're back to this chart and working on more solutions. And the last thing is, once the olives are canned, does the concentration of acrylamide changes once it's canned in a can? There's 2 papers on this. One says no degradation of acrylamide after 6 months. The other one says 25 degradations after 8 months. I have some data on this from our own research, and I'll show that to you. So we did a lot of looking around of our data. First thing is, in literature, phenolics is correlates with acrylamide in other food products. Basically, if you have more phenolics, generally you have lower acrylamide in all the food products. That is not the case for olives. Okay, there's no trend. What about if acrylamide degrades after you can it? No, not in our experience anyway. There's no correlation between acrylamide and the expiration date, and no correlation between how much acrylamide degrades and how long it's been canned. How about calcium? So earlier I said if could be a slight correlation between the amount of calcium chloride that's used and then the acrylamide that's generated. There's a very, very weak correlation if you believe R-squared value of 0.15. I'm not comfortable with this, though. So I'm not claiming there's a correlation, but this is something we're going to look at moving on. So we do know some trends. Cultivar has an effect on acrylamide formation. In our research, we have seen that we generally see higher acrylamide in Manzanillo than Hohi Blanca and Carcerenia cultivars. But the processing method definitely overrules that cultivar effect, meaning sterilization temperature, the light treatment, they all have greater impact on than the cultivar difference. Larger fruits potentially have lower acrylamide than smaller fruit. This could be related to surface area, but this also could just related to that different cultivars also have different sizes. So there's a lot of variables there. I'll show you, this is our data that shows that the Manzanillo cultivar and Hakadiki tend to have a higher concentration of acrylamide in the samples that we look at. And the fruit sizes. So the extra large, jumbo, colossal, these are the extra large olives. They do seem to have lower value of acrylamide compared to the smaller or the medium and just regular large size fruit. So moving away from acrylamide now, so we move on to styrene, which is another toxin that's in the fruit. What we found is that the numbers are generally low, except some of the imported black ripe samples. That's these samples here. So basically what we found is domestic samples have significantly less styrene than the imported ones. The green ripe don't really have any styrene, and there's no difference between the whole slice, chopped, or fruit slice or cultivar. So 100% a processing, related to processing. So conclusion, basically what I've talked about here today is green ripe olives contain higher antioxidant compounds than black ripe, but in all the samples we look at, there are antioxidant compounds in table olives. Fatty acid profile is related to cultivar and not so much related to processing. But in all the samples that we do find a good concentration of oleic acid, which is a good fat in table olives. All the processing residues were lower than the legal limits, except a couple samples for ferrous gluconate. Green olives have less acrylamide than black ripe, and green ripe olives have no styrene, basically suggesting either storage or air oxidation contribute to styrene formation. Domestic olives have a lot less styrene than the imported olives. Moving on, what we're going to look at is to identify the cause of styrene formation in California staff olives. Even though we do see lower concentration in the imported olives compared to the domestic ones, we want to basically remove that completely because there's street laws, there's tight regulation on this in the US. So we believe it comes from actually the storage of olives. It's from microbial growth that caused the formation of styrene. So that's something we're currently confirmed with microbial DNA extraction from the samples. A second thing is, obviously, we want to either remove or reduce acrylamide completely from the products. That may involve changing the processing style, but we have identified some additives that could be added during processing that may, it works in the lab when we try in vitro, so now we're going to try it during processing. And the last thing is utilize MMR and nuclear magnetic resonance, DNA or fatty acid profile analysis to build a robust model to identify the cultivar of processed olives. So DNA has been used to identifying the cultivar of fresh olives, but there isn't a robust method to identify the cultivar of processed olives. And this is an important issue for California producers because sometimes they receive fruit from other countries and they want to know what cultivars they are. And it's not so easy when they're processed because they look more or less the same. So they do want to have a method where they can identify the cultivar of the fruit. And then we believe using the combination of MMR, DNA, and fatty acid profile that will give us an answer for that question. My time is up. So I want to give credit to California Olive Committee, which is the organization that funds this project. And my student here, Lauren Quaffer, she's a third-year PhD student. She basically did everything I talked about today. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wang. You were almost in time, no problem, including injury time and extra time. You were in time, no problem. And we have some time. Thank you indeed very much. It was very interesting to see how Californian olives are being studied in California, which is, I hope that we do the same thing in Greece, here about our olives. I don't know what is happening here. Are there any questions, observations, or remarks to be made? Κύριος Ντούτσιας. Dr. Ντούτσιας.
Ναι, σας ευχαριστώ πολύ. Ήθελα να κάνω μια ερώτηση στην κυρία Βάγκε, να μας πει, όταν λέει ripe, γιατί σε εμάς μεταφράζεται ώριμη, έχουμε μαύρες, από ό,τι λέει ώριμες, και μαύρες black ripe και green ripe. Το ώριμος σε εμάς λίγο μας μπερδεύει σε αυτό το θέμα. Μήπως θα μπορούσε να μας δώσει την έννοια του ripe. Τι σημαίνει στις ελιές το ripe. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Sure, it's a very fair question, and I was very confused about this when I first started doing research on this, because also in olive oil, it's the same thing. When you talk about ripe olives, that means the olives are purple, right? But in California, they're actually pig green, but that's the way they're processed, and they call it black ripe, because at the end, it doesn't matter if your olives were pig green or black, they all become black ripe, because the oxidation process of how they use in California. The green ripe is the same way, but without the oxidation, so they don't turn into black. So all the olives are pig green. Okay, so all the olives are pig green, but they turn black during oxidation, and then they add ferrous gluconate to it to locking that dark black color. So they call it black ripe because it looks like how the olives will look like when they're super ripe. But it's the olives are actually pig green. They're just processed into black.
Ήταν κατανοητό, κύριε Ντούτσια. Νομίζω ότι έχει κάτι άλλο να ρωτήσετε. Still.
Ναι, ήθελα το εξής να πω. Μήπως με το ripe εννοείται ότι βγάζουμε ένα προϊόν εκπικρισμένο, δηλαδή δεν είναι πικρό, επομένως παίρνουν την ορολογία ripe. Δηλαδή ότι αφαιρούμε την πικρή ουσία, που συνήθως είναι το συστατικό που δεν μας κάνει να μπορούμε να φάμε το προϊόν από το δέντρο, την αφαιρούμε την πικρή ουσία και στη συνέχεια μένει το προϊόν χωρίς να είναι πικρό. Ευχαριστώ.
Sure. The olives are debittered, but that happens during the lye treatment. So the olives are debittered. Yeah, but they come from the lye treatment. So the olives are treated with lye, they're washed, and then they're oxidized, and the ferrous gluconate is added to locking that black color. Yeah. It's mostly a name nomenclature issue. It's basically just lye-treated black olives or green olives, but it's basically lye-treated.
Thank you very much. I think you can also discuss later. You can talk later.
Later,
because
I'll find you.
Yeah. He's a big specialist. You have.
Καλησπέρα και από μένα. Να προχωρήσουμε στην τέταρτη συνεδρία, γενετική βελτίωση ποικιλίας